I do have to take some issue with some of the one-minute speeches that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were engaging in about an hour ago. I saw that the Democrat majority leader was on the floor with a chart, and that chart said, House Republicans are running out of town to cause an economic meltdown. Sounds ominous. Sounds terrible and threatening, and all sorts of calamities going to ensue. Where are Senate Democrats? Where is Chuck Schumer? They've been MIA this entire week, not even in town, but hell, they've been MIA all year, not doing a thing in the Senate, except for being the personnel office for the administration. That's all they do. They run through nominations, and heck, they're not even that good at that. So what do? They run out of town. Where was the president last week? Japan. You see this ominous threat of a looming debt ceiling date, an X date as it's being referred to, of June 1, is all manufactured crisis and theater. We know that. Americans know that. Secretary Yellen wants to figure out how we need to deal with whatever interest payments need to be paid in June. She can prioritize those payments. She can make decisions to figure out how to carry this country forward. She can walk on down here, brief us, meet with us long before the June 7th date she's currently planning to come down to talk to us, and have a conversation about, I don't know, how about taking those COVID dollars back that are sitting there unobligated to the tune of $50 billion? How about taking the IRS dollars back that are there to expand the Internal Revenue Service, an IRS which, by the way, targets the poor and minorities 3 to 5 times more than the non-poor and non-minorities? That's the truth. Why don't they take that $80 billion, combine it with the COVID money, turn it into dollars right now that you can go pay loans with? Voila, no problem. But see, my Democratic colleagues won't do that, because my Democratic colleagues prefer the fear created with a manufactured crisis. They prefer to use that crisis, as Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. They prefer to manufacture a crisis to jack up more debt on our children and grandchildren to the tune of $4 trillion. That's what they want more than anything on earth, is to spend more money to increase the power of government, to undermine our freedoms, to destroy the American way of life, and they are doing it right now. That's what's happening. The fact is, we had some of my Democratic colleagues went to the floor, and one individual said, quote, make no mistake, they, meaning Republicans, have no plan. Well, I'm sorry, we passed a bill in April. We actually passed a bill off of the floor of the House that raises the debt ceiling $1.5 trillion, provides an actual path to fiscal responsibility, and we did that in April. Oh, but see, we have no plan. We got to have this manufactured crisis. We had another quote. President Biden already lowered the deficit by $1.7 trillion. They say his budget would cut the deficit by another $3 trillion by eliminating wasteful spending on big oil and pharma, we're told. But it is in fact our Democratic colleagues who prefer to maintain their massive subsidies for the elites and the wealthy in their so-called Inflation Reduction Act just last year. My friend from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, said, quote, I ask you, think about the last time a person has said in this country that the government does too much for them. When was the last time anyone has heard or seen that? I'll say it. I'll say it right here. I don't want the government doing most of the things that the government is doing to interfere with the ability of the American people to carry out their lives. Federal, state, and local. When was the last time you had a bureaucrat show up and you said, oh joy, thank you, I'm really glad there's a bureaucrat here? When was the last time you were thankful for $32 trillion in debt, $100,000 almost for every man, woman, and child in America? Anybody thankful for $32 trillion in debt? Anybody thankful for a border that's wide open being exploited by cartels while fentanyl comes in and kills our children? Everybody thankful for that Department of Homeland Security that doesn't actually secure the homeland? Everybody thankful for an FBI that went after Scott Smith and labeled him a domestic terrorist for daring to defend his daughter in a school board meeting because she was assaulted in a bathroom? Anybody thankful for the IRS knocking on your door, auditing the poor and the minorities 3 to 5 times more? People thankful for that? Are you thankful for the EPA or the Department of Interior that sent a man to prison because he had some ponds on his ranch in Montana? We have a government that is weaponized against the American people and is undermining our liberties, and they want more of it. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want more government. They want more taxes. They want more spending. They want more bureaucrats knocking on your door, like Mark Houck in Philadelphia when he woke up to this door being knocked on by local law enforcement teamed up with federal law enforcement to go carry out a warrant to arrest him because he had defended his son exercising free speech, because he is a pro-life activist in Philadelphia. That is your government at work. The fact is, we have a decision to make here. What are we going to do? Are we going to listen to the wailing and gnashing of teeth of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, projecting a manufactured crisis to exploit fear to try to raise our debt limit, a credit card limit, by $4 trillion? I want to be very clear, and I want to be clear to my colleagues on this side of the aisle. Anybody making a deal right now? $4 trillion? Are you out of your frigging mind? When I came to this town as a lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the entire debt was $6 trillion. And what are we doing? We're having a conversation, blowing my mind, a conversation about raising our debt another $4 trillion. Why? So we can continue to fund the very bureaucrats that at least my colleagues on this side of the aisle campaign against. Well, guess what? You have a power of the purse for a reason. You should use it. Federalist 58, James Madison, what did he say? He said that the power of the purse granted to the people's house was the most powerful tool you can give against the tyranny of the executive branch. My colleagues on this side of the aisle all too often like to go around and campaign against all of the things that the bureaucracy is doing or that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle support. But when it comes down to game time, and it's game time right now, when it comes down to game time, are we going to use the power of the purse to defend the American people against the onslaught of the tyranny of the executive branch? Or are we going to tuck tail, take the first exit ramp off, and walk away? Because what I'm hearing right now, being debated, being negotiated, is taking the first exit ramp off to cut a deal. Because that's what we do in this town. Cut a deal. But that deal is not a deal for our kids and our grandkids. We passed a responsible bill in April. My message to my Republican colleagues is hold the line. My message to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, quit lying to the American people, quit advancing this fraud of a manufactured crisis, stop telling people that you can just continue to spend money we don't have, stop lying to them that there's more tax revenue to go get when we're at the highest level of tax revenue ever in our history, matched only 2 other times, World War II and in 2000 at the end of the dot-com explosion. Almost 20% of our GDP we are taking in by taxes. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle hide behind that, and they refuse to acknowledge that this government is too big, too burdensome, too weaponized against the American people. So we passed a bill that would pull back discretionary spending, $131 billion to 2022 spending levels. Now, that's what we were spending a mere 6 months ago. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle would tell you, oh my God, you're going to completely dismantle everybody's life and well-being. It's literally what we were spending 6 months ago. More than that. You can maintain defense levels at 2023 levels, current levels, and you can return your bureaucratic state, your non-defense spending, to merely what we were spending right before COVID. Recognizing, by the way, that our government is now 40% bigger since the beginning of COVID. We can return it to pre-COVID levels, which, by the way, polls at 76%. Most Americans say, yeah, I think I could deal with that great efficiency of the bureaucracy pre-COVID. We can do that. That's what we passed. That's what Republicans stood up and passed and put into the Senate's hands. And by the way, if we did that, we could fund NDD, that's non-defense discretionary, at the exact same level as that great MAGA extremist Barack Obama proposed for fiscal year 2024 in his last budget. Secondly, we passed measures that would repeal the grid-destroying tax credits, passed in the name of, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say green, I say unreliable energy in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. That will enrich leftists, enrich corporations, and enrich the Chinese Communist Party. Last year, through reconciliation, which is not the way we should do business, this is how Obamacare was passed, with a mere majority vote in the House and the Senate, with 158 proxy votes, people in this chamber who were not physically present during the August recess, on a party line vote, Democrats jammed through a giant giveaway to the wealthiest Americans. Goldman Sachs estimates it at $1.2 trillion, over 3 times the original estimate. If we do not carry through as Republicans, if we do not carry through with the measure we passed in April to reduce those subsidies, then the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, I think it is, estimates that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, we use too many acronyms in this town, could make wind and solar account for nearly 60% of the U.S. electricity generation by 2050. Now, everybody's jumping down in joy in all the schools across America because they've been told wind and solar, it's the magic unicorn energy. Don't you understand? Everything is great. It's clean. It's wonderful. They don't ever talk about the side effects. They don't ever talk about the children that are mining all of the minerals to be used in the solar panels being abused around the world. They never talk about the environmental impact of the turbines, the wind turbines, West Texas, what happens to birds. They never talk about what it means for our national security and empowering China. They never talk about the fact that you can't have a grid that stays up and powers your homes and your hospitals and your lives because you don't have gas-fired plants, you don't have coal-fired plants, you don't have nuclear plants backing up the grid. Because I can tell you, on a cloudy, windless day in Texas, we in trouble. It's true. But everybody's going to go around on the other side of the aisle, and they go, and I've seen them, they go give speeches to kids on the steps of the Capitol. And they go, oh, we're doing all this great thing for you. Don't you know? We care about the environment. We care about our planet. You now have all of this great clean energy. Well, enjoy being in third world status with brownouts, like we're seeing in Europe, like we're seeing in other parts of the world, where they're retreating from the full embrace of so-called green, i.e. unreliable energy resources, because you create energy poverty. You undermine human flourishing. You undermine the well-being and the prosperity of the poorest of the poor in this world when you take away the ability for us to have energy, and that's exactly what my Democrat colleagues did, and in the process are enriching their fat cat friends. 90% of the subsidies go to corporations $1 billion and up. Oh, but I thought this was all the good stuff, the unicorn energy stuff. No. Rich people, financiers, making tons of money on the back of grift, of corporate cronyism. The worst kind of corporate cronyism you've ever seen on display happening right here. And what are Republicans doing? Running away. Saying, well, they'll never give up their signature Inflation Reduction Act bill. Bull. They'll give it up if we take it to them and hold the line for the American people. Stand up and hold the line, to my Republican colleagues, against the worst form of corporate cronyism I've ever seen on the floor of this body. How about the 80% of the electric vehicle subsidies that go to people who make $100,000 or $300,000 as a couple? Yeah. So the poor guy out there as a plumber trying to drive his pickup around is going to be told, you got to go subsidize the little suburbanite family running around in their EV feeling good about themselves, patting themselves on the back while they go plug their EV in to charge it using as much power as you use for your air conditioning unit, which has to come from somewhere. And that somewhere ain't nuclear, ain't gas, and ain't coal anymore because they're destroying our ability to produce the reliable power that we need for the very EVs they want to subsidize. And let's not even talk about how much that's empowering China. Directly, Chinese companies are eligible for these climate credits. A recent analysis found Chinese companies could end up with $125 billion in IRA subsidies. So you're giving them all the power, the Chinese Communist Party. You're subsidizing them with direct taxpayer money. You're allowing the Chinese to then sell us back the panels made with the minerals that they mine. How in the world is this good for our national security or our energy security? It's not. Democrats should be ashamed. Republicans should be ashamed if we walk away, which is what they're about to do. Cutting a deal that undermines the American people. Taking the very first off-ramp, the very first exit ramp. How about the third issue? Overturning Biden's unfair, deficit increasing, and tuition increasing student loan bailout, which will cut the deficit by $400 to $500 billion this year. We passed that. Yay, Republicans. They were all cheering down here. We should cheer it. But guess what we're doing? Walking away from it. You know why? Because my Republican colleagues say, don't worry, the Supreme Court will strike it down as unconstitutional. Guess what? One, don't count on it. Don't put all your eggs in the Supreme Court basket. Number two, there's this thing called the Constitution, which we're supposed to enforce and support. You don't walk away from your own view of the constitutionality of the unconstitutional act by a president. It's our job. If I hear one member of the Republican Party in this House use the term power of the purse, who walks away from forcing Democrats to end this unlawful, unconstitutional act by the President of the United States to unilaterally choose to make individuals in this country pay off the loans of other individuals in this country. How is that standing up for the people? How is that holding the line? 87% of the American people don't have student loans. Of the people who do have student loans, 56% of them have graduate degrees. Yet you're going to go ask that same plumber who's got to go get in his pickup, he's now subsidizing that suburbanite driving their little EV, going around saying, look at me, how great I am, subsidizing that, and also subsidizing that idiot's gender studies degree. The plumber who started a business, didn't take out a loan, worked hard, wants what's best for his kid, is now subsidizing the gender studies degree kids sitting in a basement, tweeting, sitting on their parents' health care plan that allows them to stay on it until they're 26, and you wonder why we're $32 trillion in debt. But what we're going to do, in all of our infinite wisdom, is cut a deal. Cut a deal to get what? More about that later, whenever we figure out what that is. I would remind everybody that the Speaker Pelosi herself said, quote, people think the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. Well, there was no act of Congress, yet we're funding it. We defunded it as Republicans, but now we're walking away from defunding that to cut a deal. We should not do that. Number 4, rescinding the $80 billion Democrats gave to the IRS to hire 7,000 agents that will target working and middle-class taxpayers the most. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say Republicans just want to protect rich tax cheats. According to CBS, that great purveyor of right-wing conspiracy news, the IRS audits the poor at 5 times the rate of everyone else. According to the New York Times, also a great purveyor of radical right-wing news, quote, black taxpayers are at least 3 times as likely to be audited by the Internal Revenue Service as other taxpayers. Rich people have lawyers. Rich people get subsidies by the very people who go out and campaign and say they're doing things for the American people while they enrich their fat cat buddies, as my Democratic colleagues did with the Inflation Reduction Act, which my Republican colleagues voted to end and now are walking away from eliminating. Reform number 5, implement the REINS Act to end the abuse of executive power by empowering Congress to approve major regulations that cost Americans billions of dollars. President Biden's regulatory delusion in his first 2 years has saddled the American people with at least $318 billion in total costs, more than 218 million hours of paperwork. But more than that, there are massive regulations being carried out by this administration through executive fiat and order that has a massive economic impact, but more importantly, a massive liberty impact on the American people, turning felons into millions of Americans for daring to have a piece of plastic that attaches to a constitutionally protected weapon. The student loan fiasco I just described. Regulation after regulation by this administration. And all we want to do is pass the REINS Act, which we just passed out of the Judiciary Committee, by the way. And are we going to make that a part of our deal? Not reading about it in all the leaked reports I'm seeing. Let's kick that one aside. Let's allow the administration to continue to run ramshot over the American people through executive fiat because we want a deal. Reform number 6. Strengthen and establish work requirements for able-bodied Americans that are receiving government assistance, just like President Biden supported. Well, I've gotten to one where I think there may be at least a little fight on this side of the aisle to try to get one of the things that we passed. I don't know how much. I don't know whether it'll apply to Medicaid. I don't know what it'll apply to. But I can tell you that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they don't want people to have to work. President Biden voted for it 11 times. President Clinton signed it. But your modern Democratic Party in 2023 wants to pay people not to work. There is no other explanation for it. If they say otherwise, it's not true. We want people to work. We want to get the benefit of getting people off of welfare reform. There is, in fact, dignity to work. Our country depends on it. Our society depends on it. Our children depend on seeing their parents work. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't want that. Apparently we do, and I at least think it's apparently part of whatever deal is being discussed. But it ought to be, and it ought to be fully a part of it, because we passed it already. We passed a deal. Finally, reclaiming billions in unobligated COVID funds. Well, that's just the peanuts laying left on the floor. The mere $40 or $50 billion of unobligated COVID funds left of the $5 trillion or whatever we blew through in the last 3 years, decimating our economy and driving up inflation. The fact of the matter is, we have an obligation in this body, in the people's house, on both sides of the aisle, to do our job, to stop spending money recklessly, to stop printing money, to stop driving up inflation, to stop denying our children their inheritance. When everybody goes around on Memorial Day this weekend and they go stand up with veterans and they go salute the fallen and they go to Arlington National, they go to the cemetery at Fort Sam Houston or any one of our other national cemeteries around this country, what did they fight for? Did they fight for us to cut a deal? Because I'm pretty sure the boys in Bastogne sitting in the foxhole freezing to death weren't interested in moving that line back to Normandy. They'd gone from Normandy to Bastogne. Hold the damn line. Don't back off, Republicans. Stand up for the country that you go out and campaign for. Hold the line for the American people, because the bill we passed in April, I'm going to be honest with you, it's a down payment on what we have to do. It's not everything we have to do. It's just the beginning. And if we walk away from that, because some people get weak-kneed about, oh my God, they're crying, oh my God, we're not going to make our debt payments. Yes, we are. The President of the United States knows what you know. We can't walk away from our debt payments. We have to make those payments. Secretary Yellen and the President know it. They will make the payments. We will not default, but we are defaulting on the American dream every single day that goes by, where we continue to spend money we don't have to fund the bureaucrats at war with the American dream. And if Republicans walk away from this, they don't deserve to stay in the majority any more than the Democrats do. We should hold the line for the American people, and we should hold the line for the future of this country. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back.